Hello, welcome to another episode of Adventures in Bing Chat. So in this episode, what I thought I would do is try an idea where you start off with a primer and you riff off of the original primer in different and interesting ways. So one thing I think I've mentioned in the past is generally, and of course it depends on what sort of prompts I'm doing, but sometimes I do a more conversational prompt where I'm almost like projecting a role onto Bing Chat. Either I might describe like how I want it to behave, or I just through conversational style get into a pattern of conversation where it feels like you're conversing with a friend. And one thing that you'll notice when you experiment with Bing or any large language model, any chatbot that's built on foundation models, is this thing. I often refer it. There's a couple of things that often seem to go on, and that's this almost like as you're doing this backwards and forwards, it will modify its answers based on but based on what it's told you already and what you've asked. And it's interesting to see a couple of things going on here. One is how the answers alter in style and refinement by almost like this aggregation of questions you've asked before. And you have to do this a lot to notice that, I think. That's something I've noticed. The second thing, and it's sort of related, is something I'm starting to call stickiness. I don't know if I've mentioned that term within this context. I mean, it's a term that's often used in other contexts. But here, whether it sticks to the dialogue. So you ask it a question. So I do this. So I'm saying, can you create a primer for Plato? And it's going away doing its search as it usually does, and then it's coming back with a primer. Now in a moment it's going to come up with a series of sort of meta questions, I suppose, whatever you want to call them, where it starts to prompt you for questions that you could ask. I mean, you can obviously carry on asking your own questions or doing additional prompts, or you could choose to wipe this and go on to another topic. But there's almost like, based on a certain degree of stickiness, sometimes it seems like it's operating either, what would you call it? Like some form of forgetfulness, like strategic forgetfulness, where you might have to remind it, this is about what I asked you earlier, even though it's the one above. Also, you might, and I always find it's a bit of a giveaway when the questions it asks you. If any of these say things, do you want to talk about something else? Or I can show you how to make a cheese sandwich, or something like that. You can see it wants to get off topic. So my point is, just keep tabs on how sticky it is, and you may have to adjust your further questioning or further requests or asks, whatever you want to call them, prompts you're using, to allow for that, either that stickiness or lack of stickiness. And as a consequence, you can afford to get slightly more artfully vague if you want a bit of wiggle room, and it's still going to stick to the original plan, or if clearly it's getting, want a better word, getting bored, and whether or not you've just got to like nudge it back, like nudge its attention. Because in this attention is everything. So, yeah. So it looks like this is going to be fairly sticky. And that's often the case when you're doing primers. I've not had too much of a problem. There's probably the odd video here and the odd one I've done like off camera where things go a little bit wonky. But we're in fairly safe territory here. And that leads me into a second thing. So, there's loads of different types of prompts I've been doing over the course of these videos back since when I started this, which is March. And one thing I've mentioned before is I tend to often do this 3-part thing where I'll have a pre-prompt, if you like, which is just setting the ground, setting the foundations, if you like, for whatever I'm going to ask. Then I'll do the ask, the question or the request or the task or whatever I want it to do. And then often I'll follow that up with some sort of constraint or some sort of additional condition. And you might find that when I've been creating art, or getting it to create art, should I say, I might say things like, oh, don't include text, or can you do it in style of whatever. And sometimes I'll aggregate those together. Sometimes it will be spread out over multiple requests. In this example, it's interesting because what I'm going to do is the primer is going to be like the preamble. So that's my sort of bit before I start asking the questions. The sort of questions I'm asking are related to it, and they're going to be about modifying the primer in different ways. And so they're almost like a combination of 1 and 2, like the actual main purpose of the question or the prompt and any conditional stuff. So it's going to be expanding out, swapping it around, stuff like that. Now for none of these, oh yeah, I suppose that is right, for none of these, for none of the things I'm trying out, am I going to be fact checking the original primer? I'm assuming it's got it right. Of course, again, you have to be careful with any of this. And over time, again, and this ties in with the whole, looking for stickiness and looking for things. Just get a feel for where you think it might be going. Based on what sort of things it's searching for. You can normally get indicators as to when things don't look quite right. And that will hopefully remind you to be a bit more diligent and you do due diligence with whatever it comes back for. But for this purpose, I'm more trying to illustrate the relationship between the primer as a preamble and then the subsequent follow-up question, stroke, constraint, refinement, as a second ask here. So I'm going to ask it now to create a 100-word summary. Now this will lead into another interesting thing that I always think about is whenever you're doing stuff like this is feeding back into this mind space. And so you'll find that results or answers get affected by what's been before. And that's no surprise really. But they can get affected in quite subtle ways. I'm sure I may have mentioned, the whole issue of making stuff up. In fact, I've mentioned it on numerous occasions. And one thing you have to be really careful when you're wording stuff is the placement of words like imagine. Anything like that which opens up a sort of, an opportunity, if you like, to get creative by the large language model. Because you don't know when it's trying to tokenize these requests how it might be breaking that down and what it's drawing attention to, what it's prioritizing in the request which it then uses to come up with the answer. So just be very careful of certain words that might have ambiguous meanings or might cause it to give you results and taint or colour the result in a certain way that you hadn't intended. So that's that's my sort of, not lesson for the day, but that's one thing to bear in mind, and it certainly goes through my head. And the reason why I say that is that sometimes when you do follow-ups where you're asking it, you're not happy with a summary and you want it to summarise in a different way, be mindful that it might be affected by that summary. And you need to ask yourself, why didn't you like that summary? Was there something wrong in it, or the wording was wrong? If you find that it's seriously not what you want and you're trying to refine things, you might want to consider, if you don't, it doesn't matter that you lose this current thread, if you like, to go back, re-request the primer, and then to ask the question that you were going to ask. So here, the first one I wanted to try was, can you create a 100-word summary of the above primer? There's another summary here I wanted to do, which I've been playing around with, and you get some pretty interesting results, is, can you create a summary of the above primer for someone with a short attention span? It doesn't tell it how many words to do, but let's see. Now, the other thing I should have done, which I forgot to do, is I was going to take out the word above, because what if it thinks this is a primer as well? I mean, I'm hoping that it's doing it that way, but what if this is a summary of this? So again, be careful when you're doing this. Plato, old Greek guy who liked to talk and write a lot. He had a school and a cool idea about invisible shapes. He also cared about souls and rulers who are smart and good. He changed the world with his words. There you go. One for a person with a short attention span. So, the next thing I just want to show you and talk about is this idea of taking like the original reply, in this case it's a primer, and getting it to do something interesting outside of what might normally be requested. So you get primers. Sometimes you're thinking, oh well, let me turn this into an essay, or start getting it to expand out. What if I get it to do something else creative with that? So if we use the original primer and then create a 10-song playlist related to the concepts mentioned in the primer. Now this is also interesting because I haven't said how detailed I want the list. So is it just going to produce a playlist? Is it going to explain the relationship? And it is. Even though I didn't explicitly say that, I'm wondering if just the word related is sufficient for it to feel the need to relate it. So using the original primer, can you create a 10-song playlist related to the concepts mentioned in the primer? So it's relating them, or establishing a relationship, or working out a relationship, and also explaining that relationship. So I haven't had to say, can you explain your choices? It's done that. Now, this leads into another thing about it modifying as it goes along. Supposing it didn't do that, it just listed these as individual songs. I could then say after the fact, oh, can you produce an explanation of the relationship between the song and the original concept? And it'll do that. Generally it doesn't get shirty about those sort of things if it doesn't think you're just asking the same question again. But what's interesting I've noticed is then going forward, if for some reason you maybe ask for another list, it'll often just do that explanation automatically. Again, it's like refining itself based on the context of this particular topic. So yeah, again, something interesting to think about. And then you can go further and produce other outputs. So this is another interesting one. And again, I've played with these in other contexts. You may have seen me do this where I've said, oh, can you create some art inspired by the sound of X, or inspired by a certain card or a certain piece of artwork. Or I've done it for, I don't even know if I've done an episode. I basically, if I'm producing my thumbnails for my Magic the Gathering videos, I'll often say, oh, can you produce some artwork inspired by the so-and-so deck from 2015 Commander set called this, and see what comes back. And most of the time I get something very interesting and usable. So it's gone for this. That's quite scary. It's pretty scary. Now, of course, it's very dependent on what was mentioned up here. And sometimes you get stuff that's nicely abstract, and other times not so much. And again, it depends a lot on the philosopher. So if you do this with Spinoza, you'll get different sort of things, obviously, and so on. Obviously, you can do this with other things. I'm just doing primers for philosophers, or a primer for a philosopher here. But it could be a primer for anything. And you can create. Now, the other thing is it has created more of a montage or a collage. That's another thing you can do. You can, if it produces just a regular abstract piece of artwork, then what you can do is, in actual fact, yeah, there we go, I didn't even spot that. It's asking it to do a collage. If I said, I wonder if you said, can you create, again, we'll see how sticky this bit is. So I'm going to go, can you create something that is not a collage? Let's just try that without specifically referencing the primer. Yeah. So it's just going to create a painting. It is still, you can see here already. Oh, there we go. Look at that. And another thing. Okay. Oh, it's not too bad. Yeah, I'll go with that. So then we move on to the whole thing of this idea of redoing stuff. So redoing in the style of, so we have our original primer. So can you take the original primer and redo it in the style of something that would appeal to X group of individuals? So we already did one, for someone with a short attention span, but some things to try is a certain, group of users of a certain product, where that product has a certain style that is associated with it. So I don't use TikTok, honestly, so I don't know exactly what the style is, but I just wanted to use that as an example to, okay, so it's not come up with anything by the looks of things, because it's already coming back with, okay, I'm going to take a risk here. go down. See if I ask it again. It's probably going to get a bit interesting. So maybe it's stuck. This has worked before, even though TikTok's obviously a video format. So let's try a variation on this and see if it's just not. Like I said, I'm being a little bit vague because what I should do is really reword that better to say, can you create a script from the original primer that would be appropriate or be in a style that would appeal to users of TikTok? Interesting. So it doesn't want to play ball here. It doesn't want to actually produce this. This is fascinating actually, because this worked fine the other day. He says, no, it did. Trust me. And this is a thing that I've seen it before with these ones where it's related to content. It may just give you suggestions as how to do it. So again, maybe it's locked onto the fact that I said, oh, I don't know whether I want to ask it about questions about what is. So now it's sort of got into this what is frame of mind. And so the answers now are more in that what is style. So somehow I need to get it back into, get it back stuck on the primer. So if I go, can you rephrase the, should we PH in it? Yeah, rephrase the original primer for use as a script for YouTube in a style relevant to the average user. Again, I'm doing this on the fly, so I'm not, there's probably better ways of wording this. Okay, there we go. So there might be a better way of doing this in a style relevant to users of the platform. But average user is fine. And we'll see what it starts prompting me to do, whether it wants me to, wants to go down the rabbit hole of producing scripts in other styles. I've seen it request things like, Do you want me to turn this into something that can be used on Instagram? Is it going to ask me to like, comment and subscribe? Let's buy. Okay, so it is still locked into Plato. So let me just take that out, or copy it out, and I misspelled average actually. So let's try now. Now that seems to work well. Let's stick with that. And here we go, see what we got. So the other thing is obviously one of the reasons for doing stuff like this is I'm also, could be possibly trying to create a much more succinct prompt that I could use going forward. So now I would probably, get to the point where I'm going, okay, get it to write the primer and then ask it to rephrase it for use as a script in whatever. Or I can do that thing I've done before where I've said, okay, I want you to act as an agent of some description, and I'm going to provide you with a person and a platform, like a social media platform. Can you create a primer for the person and a script for the platform in the style of the platform, something like that, and then just you keep giving it stuff over and over again, and it produces that output. Oh, the OG of philosophy, let's go. Plato was an ancient Greek dude who lived like 2,400 years ago. He was a student of Socrates, who was this guy who liked to ask questions and annoy people. Plato was a teacher of Aristotle, who was like this guy who liked to write about everything and anything. Oh, I added in like there, actually, it wasn't in there. Plato started his own school called the Academy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Okay, so yeah. Now the other thing you can do, which is interesting, or we're going to try and do for a podcast in a style this, that would, in a style that would appeal. There's another possible way of doing this. Listeners of the Adam Buxton podcast. So it's probably going to say something like, "Hi Podcats, how are you doing?" or something like that. So first it's going to ask, what is the... Oh, here we go. Hello, Podcats. Oh, yeah, of course he's interviewing Plato. That's amusing. So it's written the whole script. Oh, interesting way of getting around the conversation is just it's gonna and say a few words first of all. I wonder if it's going to pass it back to Plato, or whether Plato's just going to sit there not saying anything. Oh, there we go. So I just do continue. Continue. Yeah. And it doesn't seem to want to do that. Please continue the script. Oh yeah. So this one's going to be a little bit more open-ended, because of course we're in the region, in the area of podcasts here. So, but yeah, hopefully you've seen here how, it's possible to do these sort of things from a creative aspect, where you take like a primer or some starting piece of information that it has produced, and then you expand out from that or constrict it in certain ways. And hopefully, as I've been doing this, which is part of the reason for doing this episode, you've seen how, as the answers come out and you develop the questions, that its attention and its sort of stickiness to certain concepts that are being discussed is changing, and then going forward how it maybe modifies the answers slightly based on what's gone before, both in terms of the answers themselves and the actual style of the answer, which to some degree may have been altered by me asking it to change formats or do summaries or various other things. So that's obviously an important thing to consider when you're doing any form of prompt development. And a lot of things I do, this is probably the way I prefer to do it, is more like I don't sit down with a sheet of paper and map it all out logically. I do this more sort of interactive thing where I might have an idea and I have some notepads that are dotted around the house, and I sort of jot down ideas, and then I'll sit down and just prototype it. Just sit there, try something out, try tweaking it, check that I didn't poison the well, so retry it, wipe it, and that's so on, and then just sort of distill it down. Other times, part of the process might be, as I've done here, to let it run its course. And when you do that, you might be doing it because you do want to refine the prompt, but equally you might just be doing it for your own entertainment, or to sometimes when you do it jokingly like this, if it's a subject you're not familiar with, you actually end up learning quite a bit by the end of it, if you're actually bothering to read the results. I did actually finish the podcast script, so there we go. So thanks once again for watching, and in the words here, take care and bye bye. I won't do the really loud bye at the end that Adam Buxton normally does at the close of his podcast.